now that we've covered all that naming, I know it's a lot, so there's a table in your book that kind of breaks down the naming. Make your own little chart, flow chart, whatever you need, so you can figure out all the naming. So now we're gonna move into the math part of chapter 4. So the next thing we wanna talk about is the formula mass and the molar mass. So if you remember on the periodic table, we could talk about the mass of an element. So we said the mass of any of these elements is in AMU's atomic mass units, but it's also in grams per 1 mole. And so we were able to find the molar mass of a specific element just going on the periodic table. And remember, we could go from grams to moles or moles to grams of an element by its molar mass on the periodic table. So if you forgot that, go back and check. But all of that we did at the end of that chapter was just for a single element. But in chemistry, we don't just deal with elements, we deal with compounds and molecules. So now we want to be able to go from like grams to moles or moles to grams by using a whole compound. So now we need to figure out, well, how do we find the molar mass of a whole compound? Okay? So the formula mass is the mass of an individual molecule or formula unit. So when I say individual molecule, remember molecules are the names that we use if it's a covalently formed compound, a molecular compound, and a formula unit is the name when we talk about a ionic compound. So that's why it's two different names. But how you do the math and all that's the same. Another name for this, it's also known as the molecular mass. Remember, we would call it the molar mass because it was for only one compound, but it's going to be for a molecule, so it's called molecular mass. Or you might see it as molecular weight. So pretty much it's all the same thing. Formula mass, molecular weight, all the same names for the same thing. It's what is the mass in grams per mole off the periodic table. All right, so how do we find this? So this is going to be the sum of the masses of the atoms in a single molecule. So to find the mass of the molecule, we look at the masses of each of the atoms in the molecule. All right, so for example, I have water. Now I want to know what is the molecular weight or molecular mass of water. So if I look here, I have 2 hydrogens and I have 1 oxygen. I'm just going to put OX so you don't think it's a 10. But remember, oxygen symbol is just an O. So to find the whole mass of the whole thing, we have to take its parts. So I go to my periodic table and say, well, what was the mass of hydrogen? 1.008. Don't just write 1, okay? Write out the whole thing. You might also have 1.079 depending on your periodic table, okay, and how many decimal places it goes to. So write the whole thing. So it's going to be 2 times the mass of hydrogen off the periodic table, which was 1. I'm just going to go ahead and round to 1.01. And then oxygen's mass off the periodic table is 16. Okay? So when I add those together, you're going to get 18.02. Okay? 18.02. Remember, the units here could be AMUs, atomic mass units, but also remember that if we're talking about 1 mole of water, then the mass of water is going to be 18.02 grams per mole. And this is the way you're going to see it more, okay? So I want you to start getting used to it being in grams per mole, because remember, that's how we're going to convert from grams of one to mole of the other. All right, grams per mole. All right, but this is going to be useful, being able to calculate what is the mass of a compound, but we're not wanting just to know what the mass of the compound is, the molecular weight. What we want to be able to do is to use that to convert. So remember we talked about our bridge, and if I'm going from grams, I could go all the way to atoms, and the bridge was the mole, if you remember that. That's what we want to be able to do. We want to do that whole bridge that we did before, but instead of atoms or elements, we want to do compounds. So we're going to do 2 practice problems, and it shouldn't be brand new. The only new part is the fact that we're doing a compound versus an element. Okay? And that'll be in the next lecture.